Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hello dear students, welcome to another lecture. So in this lecture, I'm going to begin with the fourth chapter of class 9th alternative English, which is the Tunguska event, Siberia 1908. Now, as the title suggests, we are going to talk about an event which took place in Siberia in the year 1908. Now, this is basically a piece of information which is shared with us by the writer Carl Sagan. Through this article, he is making the human beings aware of the phenomena that takes place in the universe. Okay, we people are not that aware of all the things, all the, the matters, the antimatter, about comets, about the meteors and their collision also. So the story, this article that Carl Sagan has written for us is simply a means to educate the people, to educate the readers that at times what happens, there is some collision that takes place between a meteor and a comet due to the planetary movements. And we human beings are so naive, we are so silly and we are so dumb that collision, we assume that it is some sort of a nuclear strike. We assume that is some sort of an attack. And when we assume something to be of such a nature, when we think that somebody has attacked on us, that there is a nuclear strike somewhere, obviously our ideologies change. We start looking at that thing with a different perspective altogether. So this is just a tale about the same. So before we read what he wishes to convey to us, let us read something about Carl Sagan. So Carl Sagan was an American astronomer who contributed greatly to the Mariner, Viking and the Voyager expeditions to the planets. So he talks about the planets and their movements. He did extensive research on the extraterrestrial life. When we talk about the presence of UFOs, he's even done research on that. He believed that humans must understand the nature of the universe. The history of mankind has always acknowledged that science and civilizations grew up together. It was important for the welfare of the human race to understand specific ideas and comprehend cosmic evolution. So Carl Sagan believed that it was very important for the human beings to understand about the universe. Because according to him, the human beings will only progress, they will only develop if they understand the scientific ideas and the cosmic evolution, the things that take place in the universe. Sagan is also the author of popular science books such as The Dragons of Eden, science fiction such as Contact, and the award-winning 1980 television series Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, watched by over 500 million viewers. Sagan narrated and co-wrote the series, which was later written into the book Cosmos. So Sagan was the recipient. So he received the very famous Joseph Priestley Award for his distinguished contributions to the welfare of mankind and the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. So these are the awards that Sagan had received. So let us start reading now. The earth is a lovely and more or less placid place. Things change, but slowly. We can lead a full life and never personally encounter a natural disaster more violent than a storm. And so we become more complacent, relaxed and unconcerned. But in the history of nature, the record is clear. Worlds have been devastated. On the landscapes of other planets where the records of the past have been preserved, there is abundant evidence of major catastrophes. It is all a matter of time scale. An event that would be unthinkable in 100 years may be inevitable in 100 million. Even on the earth, even in our own century, bizarre natural events have occurred. So Sagan continues to tell us that earth is a lovely place and it is very less placid. Less placid means it is very relaxed. There is not a lot of movement or not a lot of things, not many disturbances, not many obstacles have taken place on this place, on the earth. Things change when we talk about earth, but they change very slowly. He says that it can be possible that we lead a full life. We have survived, let's say, 70 years and we did not come across any natural disaster more violent than a storm. So he says that it is possible for a few human beings who did not see anything worse than a storm. And so we become complacent, and so we become peaceful. Complacent, we become very peaceful, relaxed and unconcerned. We don't care about anything because there isn't anything dangerous that we have faced. But in the history of nature, the record is clear. When we talk about the history, there isn't much that we can debate about. Worlds have been devastated. He says that there have been moments when the entire world was devastated. It was destroyed to the bits. On the landscape of other planets, where the records of the past have been preserved, there is abundant evidence of major catastrophes. So when we talk about the other planet rather than Earth, on the other planets, there have been records of the past being preserved. The past of, the past records or the past occurrences of we human beings, they are there on the planet. And these records are an abundant evidence. These records are a very big evidence, very big proofs of the fact that in the past there were some very major catastrophes, very major destructions that took place on the planet. He says it is all a matter of time scale. Whatever happened because of time. An event that would be unthinkable in 100 years may be inevitable in 100 million. So he says there might be an event which you could not even think of in the last 100 years. But in the next 100 million years, it will become inevitable. Inevitable, something that you cannot prevent from happening, something that you cannot stop from happening. So he says it's only a matter of time. Even on the earth, he says, even on our own country, some very bizarre means very strange natural events have occurred. In the early morning hours of June 30, 1908, in central Siberia, a giant fireball was seen moving rapidly across the sky. Where it touched the horizon, an enormous explosion took place. So he talks about 30th June 1908 in central Siberia. There was a very huge fireball that could be seen moving very quickly in the sky. The moment that fireball touched the horizon, what is the horizon? Horizon is that phenomena. It is that place where the sky and the earth meet. So the moment that giant ball touched the horizon, an enormous, a very big, a very dangerous explosion took place. It leveled some 2,000 square kilometers of forest and burned thousands of trees in a flash near the impact site. So that explosion was so bad that some 2,000 square kilometers of forest was leveled. It was all burned. All the trees were brought down to the ground, and thousands of trees were burnt in a flash. Within seconds they were burnt. It produced an atmospheric shock wave that twice circled the earth. Because of this explosion, there was a shock wave which was sent to the atmosphere. And this shock wave, this circled the earth 2 times. For 2 days after that explosion, there was so much fine dust in the atmosphere that one could read in a newspaper at night by scattered light in the streets of London, 10,000 kilometers away. He says that for 2 days after that explosion, there was so much dust, white, bright dust because of the explosion in the atmosphere, that you could even read newspaper on the streets without a light. So there was so much of dust, light particles, around you. And that too 10,000 kilometers away from where this explosion had taken place. The government of Russia, under the Tsars, could not be bothered to investigate so trivial an event, which after all had occurred far away among the backward Tunguska people of Siberia. It was 10 years after the revolution, before an expedition arrived to examine the ground and interviewed the witnesses. These are some of the accounts they brought back. So, the government of Russia, who at that time were under the rule of the Tsars, they did not bother, they did not feel it important to investigate, to look into a trivial event. Trivial, something which is so small. They thought it was such a small thing. An explosion, a forest fire can happen anywhere. So they did not feel like, investigating into the matter, especially because this explosion had took place in the backward Tunguska people of Siberia. So the region that it affected was where the backward people of Siberia, the name of that tribe was Tunguska tribe. So these people had lived there, and so the government did not feel the need to investigate. It was 10 years after the revolution before an expedition arrived to examine the ground. So after revolution, 10 years after the revolution, there was an expedition, there was a search party, there was a group of people who wanted to get into the depths of that event. They went to that ground where the explosion took place, and they started interviewing the witnesses. They started interviewing the people who had seen this explosion of their own eyes. And what were some of the accounts? What were some of the, statements of the witnesses? This article is basically written by Sagan to inform and to educate we as human beings about all the cosmic things that take place around us, He wants to tell us about the multiple things that take place in the universe which we should be aware of. Otherwise, we might mistaken it to be some sort of a nuclear attack. We had started reading that there was a fire, a forest fire that took place in Siberia. Until the revolution, nobody wanted to look into the matter and investigate. But it was only after that, when there were a few expeditions which took place on the site, and it was then that the people got to know about the reality behind it. So what we are going to read now is the account of a few eyewitnesses. So let us start reading. Early in the morning, when everyone was asleep in the tent, it was blown up into the air, together with the occupants. When they fell back to earth, the whole family suffered slight bruises, but Akulina and Ivan actually lost consciousness. When they regained consciousness, they heard a great deal of noise and saw the forest blazing round them and much of it devastated. So, early in the morning that day, when that forest fire had taken place, the eyewitness tells us that everybody was sleeping in the tent, and because of the forest fire, because of that blast, the tent blew off, it blew up into the air, including its occupants. The people who were there in the tent, they also just blew off into the air. When they fell back to the earth, the whole family suffered slight bruises. Bruises, cuts, okay. So they were blown up into the air and then they were brought down on the earth. So because of this force, there were slight bruises that they suffered. But Akulina and Ivan actually lost consciousness. So these are two people, Akulina and Ivan, they lost consciousness. They just, got unconscious at that moment. And when they regained it, when they got conscious again, they came back to their senses, they heard a lot of noise and they saw the forest blazing around them. Blazing, it was burning around them. And much of it devastated. Devastated, it was all destroyed. I was in the fields and had only just got one horse harnessed to the harrow and begun to attach another, when suddenly I heard what sounded like a single loud shot to the right. I immediately turned round and saw an elongated flaming object flying through the sky. The front part was much broader than the tail end, and its color was like fire in the daytime. It was many times bigger than the sun, but much dimmer, so that it was possible to look at it with the naked eye. Behind the flames trailed what looked like dust. It was wreathed in little puffs, and blue sterners were left behind from the flames. As soon as the flame had disappeared, bangs louder than shot of the guns were heard. The ground could be felt to tremble, and the window panes in the cabin were shattered. So another eyewitness had accounted that he was in the fields, he tells us, and he had harnessed one of his horses to the harrow. Harnessed is tie. Harrow is that hook to which the horses are tied. So this person tells us that he had harnessed one horse and was beginning to attach the other horse when suddenly he heard a shot on to his right. He immediately turned around and he saw that there was an elongated flaming object flying through the sky. Elongated, very big, burning, thing which was flying in the sky. He describes to us that the front part of that thing was broad, it was big, and then there was a tail attached to it. The object, although it was a daytime, but it was very much visible. It seemed that it was burning. The light of that object was dim. It was less bright than that of a sun, and therefore this person could look at that object with his naked eyes, You cannot look at the sun like that. It is going to hurt you. But to look at this object was possible because of the dimmer light. He also tells us that behind, when the tail of that object ended, there was something like dust, and it was wreathed in little puffs. Wreathed, surrounded by, covered by little dust, and the steam of something, smoke was there all around, and there were some blue things which were coming out of that flames. Now, as soon as the flame disappeared, it got away from his eyes, he heard a banging sound which was louder than that of a gunshot. And after that bang, the earth began to tremble. It started to shiver. It started to shake. Also, The window panes of his cabin, they got shattered. They were broken to pieces. This remarkable occurrence is called the Tunguska event. So this is what the Tunguska event was. Some scientists have suggested that it was caused by a piece of hurtling antimatter annihilated on contact with the ordinary matter of the earth, disappearing in a flash of gamma rays, but the absence of radioactivity at the impact site gives no support to this explanation. So, there were a few scientists who are of the opinion that this blast, was a result of a hurtling antimatter. Now, there are a few matters. We all know what is a matter. We've learned that in science, anything that occupies space, has mass, that is a matter. While there are a few antimatters also. Okay. So, some scientists believe that this that happened was because of a hurtling antimatter. This happened because of an antimatter which annihilated, which destroyed as soon as it came into contact with a piece of earth. And then it disappeared. It changed into gamma rays and it disappeared. But at the site, the impact site where this blast actually took place, there was no presence of radioactivity. So the radioactivity was missing. So one could not confirm whether this theory was correct or not. Others postulate that a mini black hole passed through the earth in Siberia and out the other side. But the records of the atmospheric shock waves show no hint of an object booming out of the North Atlantic later that day. Perhaps it was a spaceship of some unimaginably advanced extraterrestrial civilization in desperate mechanical trouble, crashing in a remote region of an obscure planet. So there were others who postulate, who have perceived this theory, who are of the opinion that there was a mini black hole which passed through the earth in Siberia, and then it passed through the Siberia and it went off the other side. But the record of the atmospheric shock waves, the kind of shock, the atmospheric shock waves that were sent after this blast, there was nothing which connected it to the North Atlantic until later that day. So what happened in Siberia did not affect anything that happened in North Atlantic that day. The others believed that it was probably a spaceship of some extraterrestrial civilization which was in a mechanical trouble. So it was some spaceship which stopped working on the way and it crashed into an obscure planet. Obscure, something which is unclear. So this spaceship crashed itself into a planet which was very unclear to them, which was not known to them. But at the site of the impact, again, where this impact took place, there is no evidence of a spaceship as well. Each of these ideas has been proposed, some of them more or less seriously. Not one of them is strongly supported by the evidence. So all these theories, all these ideas have been proposed, but there is not even a single idea which has any evidence behind it. So nothing can be confirmed. The key point of the Tunguska event is that there was a tremendous explosion, a great shock wave and an enormous forest fire, and yet no impact crater at this site. So Tunguska event, what are the features, what are the characteristics of this Tunguska event? There was a tremendous explosion, there was a huge explosion, a huge blast. There was a very big shock wave, something which trembled the entire area. There was a very huge forest fire, but despite that, there was no crater. Crater, when something very heavy falls onto some place, there is an impact that it leaves on the ground. Okay, the earth, the ground also gets submerged a bit. Okay, it might be a big hole or something, but it leaves an impact. But there was no impact of that sort. There seems to be just one explanation consistent with all the facts. In 1908, a piece of comet hit the earth. So Carl Sagan tells us that there is just one explanation which is falling into place, which is justifying what actually happened. And what is that explanation? That in the year 1908, a piece of comet hit the earth. In the vast spaces between the planets, there were many objects, some rocky, some metallic, some icy, some composed partly of organic molecules. They range from grains of dust to irregular blocks the size of Nicaragua or Bhutan. So, in the vast spaces between the planets, whatever spaces are there between the planets, there are many objects. These objects may be rocky in nature, they be metallic in nature, they may be icy in nature. Then some of these objects are even composed of organic molecules. They range from grains of dust. All these things can be as small as a small particle of dust to a block as big as the size of Nicaragua or Bhutan. These are the names of places. And sometimes by accident, there is a planet in the way. The Tunguska event was probably caused by an icy cometary fragment about 100 meters across, the size of a football field, weighing 1,000,000 tons, moving at about 30 kilometers per second, 70,000 miles per hour. Carl Sagan says that sometimes what happens, there is a planet in the way. In this, these spaces that we have, apart from all the objects that we have mentioned, there is a possibility of a planet also to be in its way. Tunguska event was caused, how? By an icy cometary fragment. There was a cometary fragment. There was a piece of comet which was ice cold. It was about 100 meters across. It was this big, the football field. The weight of that comet was 1,000,000 tons. It was moving at 30 kilometers per second and 70,000 miles per hour. If such an impact occurred today, it might be mistaken, especially in the panic of the moment, for a nuclear explosion. The cometary impact and fireball would stimulate all effects of a 1 megaton nuclear burst, including the mushroom cloud, with two exceptions. There would be no gamma radiation or radioactive fallout. The writer further tells us that what happened in the year 1908, if such a thing happens at present, in the panic of the moment, the people are going to get so scared by that event that they will consider it to be a nuclear explosion. Whatever, the nuclear explosion and this cometary impact, both the things when compared, they stimulated similar stimulated the impact, the after effects of both of these were exactly the same. There was a burst, just the way it had in the cometary impact, similarly it happens in the nuclear blast. Then there is a mushroom cloud, a huge smoke that was seen and can be seen. Only there are two things. There are two things which will not be there if there is a cometary impact. There would be no gamma radiation or radioactive rays. When there is a nuclear blast, both these things would be there. But in case of a cometary fallout, both the things were missing. Could a rare but natural event, the impact of a sizable cometary fragment, trigger a nuclear war? The writer further asks us that something like this, what happened, it was a very rare, but it was a natural event. Nobody triggered that. It happened on its own. But the impact of this cometary impact, this cometary attack was so big. Had that taken place at present, don't you think the people would have certainly mistaken that for a war and there would have been a nuclear war in the entire world? A strange scenario, a small comet hits the earth, as millions of them have, and the response of our civilization is promptly to self-destruct. The writer says this is very strange. Imagine, even if a small comet is going to hit the earth, what will the civilization take it to be? The civilization, that means the people of the world, will consider it to be an attack and they will be ready to destroy the others in light of the same. It might be a good idea for us to understand comets and collisions and catastrophes a little better than we do. And therefore, the writer wants us to understand what actually are comets or collisions or these catastrophes. For example, an American Vela satellite detected an intense double flash of light from the vicinity of South Atlantic and Western Indian Ocean on September 22, 1979. So, he's giving us an example. There is a satellite, American Vela satellite. This satellite detected an intense, a very severe flash of light that was coming from the vicinity. Vicinity means the surrounding areas of South Atlantic and Western Indian Ocean. When? 22nd September 1979. Early speculation held that it was a clandestine test of a slow yield, 2 kilotons, about a sixth the energy of the Hiroshima bomb, nuclear weapon by South Africa or Israel. So, the early speculation, the first thought that came to the mind of people was that this was a clandestine test. This was some sort of a nuclear bomb only, which was dropped onto them by South Africa or Israel. Only this bomb's frequency and this power of destruction was less. The political consequences were considered serious around the world. After this took place, everybody across the world considered it to be a nuclear impact, and the politicians, they had a good debate about it. But what if the flashes were instead caused by the impact of a small asteroid or a piece of a comet? The writer says, what if that flash was just the result of an asteroid or a comet? Since airborne overflights in the vicinity of the flashes showed not a trace of unusual radioactivity in the air. This is a real possibility and underscores the dangers in an age of nuclear weapons of not monitoring impacts from space better than we do. The writer further tells us that this airborne, whatever happened in the atmosphere at that time, was actually the flashes, the burns, whatever it was. There was not even a single trace, not even a single element of some unusual radioactivity. Nuclear weapons will always have radioactive elements in them. But it did not have any radioactivity in the air, and therefore that was no nuclear explosion. That was just the outcome, that was just the result of something that took place in our space. And therefore the writer wants us to know our space in a better manner. He says a comet is made mostly of ice water, that is H2O ice, with a little methane ice and some ammonia ice. Striking the Earth's atmosphere, a modest cometary fragment would produce a great radiant fireball and a mighty blast wave, which would burn trees, level forests, and be heard around the world. So, comet is mostly made up of ice water. Okay, H2O ice with little methane. These are all the things we've heard of and read of and even learnt in chemistry. And there is some ammonia ice also. Now, striking the Earth's atmosphere, when a comet strikes the Earth's atmosphere, a modest cometary fragment would produce a great radiant fireball. As soon as a small piece of comet will hit the Earth, the outcome of it will be a very huge fireball and also a powerful blast wave, something that will make the trees burn, level the forest. Everything would be destroyed in the forest, and something that is so powerful that it can be heard across the world. But it might not make much of a crater in the ground. And as we have read, no crater, no impact would be left on the ground of it. The ice would all be melted during the entry. The moment this comet would enter the Earth's surface, the ice would melt. There would be few recognizable pieces of the comet left, perhaps only a smattering of small grains from the non-icy parts of the cometary nucleus. In fact, the writer tells us that since it was an icy comet, once it is going to blast, only few particles of it will be left over. And these particles will only be those particles that were non-icy in nature. Recently, the Soviet scientist E. Sobotovich has identified a large number of tiny diamonds that were strewn over the Tunguska site, spread across this site where the blast took place. Such diamonds are already known to exist in meteoroids that have survived impact and that may originate ultimately from comets. So these diamonds were actually what? When the icy comet blasted, the small pieces of the same were spread across the area. And it is believed and it is proven that these were the parts of comet only. On many a clear night, if you look patiently up at the sky, you will see a solitary meteor blazing briefly overhead. Solitary, one single, alone. So you would see a meteor, one single meteor, which would be burning over your head. On some nights, you can see a shower of meteors. Always on the same few days of every year, a natural fireworks display, an entertainment in the heaven. So he says, when on one night you will see just one single meteor over your head, there may be other nights when you will see a shower of such meteors. And this natural fireworks is an entertainment in the heaven. This is something which takes place in the universe because of what is present there. These meteors are made by tiny grains smaller than a mustard seed. They are less shooting stars than falling stuff. So these meteors cannot be even called shooting stars. These are just falling fluffs. These meteors simply fall down from the heaven. Momentarily brilliant as they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they are heated and destroyed by friction at a height of about 100 kilometers. So the moment these meteors enter the Earth's atmosphere, they get heated and they get destroyed by the friction. And at what height do they get destroyed? About 100 kilometers. Meteors are the remnants of the comets. So what is a meteor? When a comet blasts, what is left over, what remains? Remnants means what remains is a meteor. Old comets, heated by repeated passages near the sun, break up, evaporate and disintegrate. So whatever are the old comets, they get heated by the repeated passages near the sun. So when repeatedly they get passed by the sun, they break up, they evaporate into the air and they disintegrate. They just mix up with the other things around. The debris spreads to fill the full cometary orbit. Debris means whatever is the leftover after this, that spreads and that fills the cometary orbit, that gets settled into the orbit, that gets settled into the axis of the comets. Where the orbits intersects the orbits of the earth, there is a swarm of meteors waiting for us. He says that orbit of the earth, there is a point where the orbit of the earth, it actually meets the orbit of the comet. And at that point, you can see there is a swarm, there is a huge crowd of meteors that you can see. Some part of the swarm is always at the same position in the Earth's orbit. So the meteor shower is always observed on the same day of every year. So some of this meteor shower that remains fixed at the same place in the orbit. And that is why it takes a round. After a year, when that round is completed, the same time, the same day of the year, there is a meteor shower. June 30, 1908 was the day of the Beta Taurid meteor shower connected with the orbit of comet Encke. So what happened on 30th of June 1908? That day was the day of Beta Taurid meteor shower. This is the name of the meteor shower that took place in connect to the orbit of comet Encke. So comet Encke, the orbit of comet Encke was used by the meteor shower of Taurid meteors. The Tunguska event seems to have been caused by a chunk of comet Encke, a piece substantially larger than the tiny fragments that cause those glittering, harmless meteor showers. And what happened at Tunguska was basically that a chunk, small pieces of comet Encke. The only difference was that these pieces of comet Encke were larger than those glittering, those shining, harmless meteor showers. And since these pieces of comet Encke were bigger, therefore, when they came in contact with the Earth's surface, their impact was bigger, which finally led to a forest fire, a shock wave, but did not leave a crater because that comet was made of ice. So, my dear students, with this we come to the end of this chapter. So, as I told you, this basically is an article by Carl Sagan wherein he is telling us about the importance of learning the reason, the logic behind the comets and the meteors and whatever takes place in our universe. Taking the example of Tunguska event which took place in Siberia in 1908, he tells us that there was a long fire, an elongated fiery object that could be seen in the sky that hit the ground. The moment it hit the ground, the forest which was in that area that got all leveled, the trees were burnt and the earth was trembling. People, the scientists, earlier nobody felt like getting into the depths of this matter because this happened in a very backward region. But later on, after the revolution, when scientists actually started listening to the stories of the eyewitnesses, there were multiple theories which came out. Some believed it was a nuclear attack. Some believed it was some extraterrestrial activity. But nothing could be proved. It is Carl Sagan who tells us that it was no nuclear impact, only it was a comet. It was an icy comet which entered the earth The moment it entered the earth, it got heated up and it ended in a blast. He also explains to us that the reason this blast was so big and so harmful was because the comet was a bigger in size. He tells us that there are multiple meteor showers that take place around us every year, but we never pay any heed to them because they are non-destructive. The only thing is that this meteor was bigger in size and therefore it left a bigger impact. And that is why he wants, all the people to learn about the cosmic things, about the things that take place in the universe, so that in the heat of the moment, we do not mistake it to be some nuclear attack and we start a war.